Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for the Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was created by David. David recently created this image on our Zion National Park workshop. David was working with a Canon Rebel, an effective focal length of 16 millimeters. The exposure trio is ISO 400 f6.7 and 1/90th of a second. This is an image that we critiqued on the workshop. David's been generous enough to share it here on the website. And one of the things that I talked about right away when I was looking at this image is how much I enjoyed a lot of things in the lower part of the image. We just consider that part. I talked about really enjoying the feeling of color in the lower part. We've got warm ideas, reflected light from the mountain, and warm rocks that are surrounding a middle that has some really beautiful, cool colors, greens and blues, and then blue-greens. Also talked about how in the lower part of the image I really enjoy the repetition and feeling of unity between the quality of line that's being expressed in these plants, bushes and small trees along the side of the Virgin River, and how that repeats the implication of quality of line that David has created by shooting the surface of the water here at a pretty fast shutter speed. A 90th of a second has stopped the motion and texture of the water. And this feeling of line in the water, to me, does a beautiful job of repeating the expression of line in these subjects in the image. I also really enjoy the repetition and feeling of unity of shape. These rocks are very dominating ideas. They feel sort of like blocks in the image. And when we look at the implied shapes, either from reflected color or different values of luminosity on the surface of water, both the positive space shapes and negative space shapes that are being implied, to me, rhyme off of the shape of the blocks. And I also just really like the feeling of all the textures that are happening in the lower part of the image. One of the things that I talked about after that in the critique is what happens for me up here in this part of the image is that this sandbar is very high contrast, and it becomes a very high value subject in the image. So I want to talk about that for a minute. If we're working in a documentary way in photography, we can, I think, in a lot of ways just forget about design. If people understand that we're documentary photographers, we're setting ourselves up to say to people, I am putting my camera in an interesting place, and it's kind of up to you as the viewer to look at the different subject matter, and this is sort of above and beyond or outside of the realm of just design. If we're trying to work traditionally, so we're trying to photograph something that speaks to us on some level and communicate those things outside of just the subject matter itself, then design starts to come in, and it can get very complicated. We're sort of constantly trying to walk the line between our personal vision and what it is that moved us in the first place, and just intuition and feel as we're looking through the viewfinder, or these days looking at the LCD. As we work in live viewer, we take a picture and look at it, sort of walking the fine line between feeling about the subject, how we would like to arrange things, and then if we're interested in design, understanding that some parts of design are very subjective, other parts are not. They're very objective. For instance, we can identify color opposites by mixing them and getting gray. We also know that one of the highest value, if not the highest value thing in an image, that's the thing that will draw the viewer's eye the most, will be an area or areas of high contrast. And knowing that when I'm working traditionally, if I have an area like this that's very high contrast, a lot of times I'm asking myself the question, first, is it one of my main subjects or the main subject? If not, how does it motivate or move the viewer through the frame? Is it leading to a main idea? And in this case, what happens for me is that this idea actually divides the frame into two pictures that I really like quite a bit. And it's sort of hard for me to go back and forth between these two areas because this is such a high value separation. And that starts to make me think about a crop for the lower part of the image. And if I was there working with David and looking through the camera, I would say, what about a panoramic up here? I really like this as an image, and this is an image for different reasons. And this part, to me, is just making it hard for me to take this idea and marry them together in one frame. Let's look at a crop of the lower part of the image. If we come in and we crop, I think a lot of things come into play now that help to unify this image in terms of design, if we're thinking about communicating at the level of design. I think something else happens that's even more basic than that isn't specific to this image. I think that it's much more of a general idea connected to all of our pictures. If we crop this down from the top, we start to make this less literal because we're now just looking at a part of the scene. We're looking at a part of the scene that could be a location in a lot more places on a waterway than if we are to show everything here. And when we start to shoot parts of things and make them more abstract, we can make the image more personal to ourselves, and we can also give the viewer the chance to have an experience with the image that relates to something that's more personal. If we just want to talk about design as it relates to the original way the image was shot and then cropping it, one of the things that I like about cropping this image is that in addition to coming up with a version, if we just crop away the top part that is more about color, more about line, more about texture, more about shape, more about the intrinsic ideas, we also start to get an image that tightens up if we think about balance in a very simple way. And when I go to crop, one of the simple ways that I think about balance is if I'm going to crop, then after I crop, how is balance going to play out from top to bottom, side to side, and corner to corner? And the first thing that I did here was I just cropped from the top so that we came below the part that we felt like was a separate idea. And so that's it. I'm not thinking much beyond that. But if that's all that I do, right away, looking at this crop, I get the feeling of balance from top to bottom. It's very unified. Warm, cool, warm, warm, cool, warm. And also just three ideas playing along that edge. All of the corners are sort of pinned out in the same way with these warm shapes. So we have a color that's the same and shapes that are pretty much the same. And then if we look to side balance, we have an idea that moves in a strong way in between two other ideas, and the same thing over here with these small trees and bushes. So if I look at balance, I feel like the image is very balanced in a lot of different ways, or more balanced than it was before the crop. The other thing that I think about when I'm cropping is if I have a main idea that expresses a shape or a certain dimension or feeling of shape, will the crop help to rhyme that? And I really feel like pushing this more towards a square is more unified with the feeling of blocks that we already talked about in the beginning of the video. And I might even come in and crop a little bit more from the right hand side. I feel like if I do that, I lose some hard contrast along the edge, and when I crop from the right, I make the repetition of this idea moving into this corner even more dynamic than it was before, and I'm pushing the overall shape more to the feeling of the same kind of blocks in the positive and negative space shapes that are showing up in the image. I really love where Dave started out here in the image. I think that he chose a great location in which to shoot with some absolutely fantastic light. I think he's working with color in a really beautiful way. I think he's working with the shapes that are rhyming in a really beautiful way. And just want to say a big thank you to David for not only participating in the workshop, but being generous enough to share this image on the Daily Critique. And I want to say a big thank you to you for being here. Hope to see you again real soon on another version of the Daily Critique.